Infrastructure development, DMO to continue to raise funds through Sukuk. Nigeria's collective investment funds rise to 1.32 trillion naira. Nigeria's stock exchange market capitalization drops further as analysts predict gloomy outlook due to COVID-19 outbreak. Crude oil consolidates on fresh virus concerns. And still on the spirit of marking Nigeria's Democracy Day, this edition of the program will take a look at the country's economic journey. You are watching Business Express, reaching you on the network service of the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Benny Adams, your guide. Despite the market and economic uncertainty due to the coronavirus pandemic, investors have expressed a lot of confidence in Nigeria's debt market. The Debt Management Office, DMO, announced an oversubscription of the third sovereign sukuk, for which it offered 150 billion naira to investors. Total subscriptions of 669.124 billion naira, representing a subscription level of 446%, as reported by the DMO. The impressive demand for the sukuk, it says, came from a wide range of investors, which include ethical funds, insurance companies, fund managers, and retail investors, among others. The participation by a wide range of investors, the DMO notes, is in line with the objectives of diversifying the investor base for government securities and promoting financial inclusion. A total net asset of collective investment schemes and funds in Nigeria has risen to 1.322 trillion naira. According to latest figures provided by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the net asset value of registered professionally managed CIS rose by 539 billion naira, or 68.8% from 782.64 billion naira on May 31st, 2019 to 1.322 trillion naira by May 31st, 2020. Collective investment schemes, also known as mutual funds, are joint investment vehicles through which investors pool funds and invest in chosen basket of securities to optimize returns and reduce risks. Democracies globally are associated with higher human capital accumulation, lower inflation, and higher economic freedom. Can that be said of the Nigerian experience between 1966 and 1999, as well as from 1999 to date? 21 years ago, Nigeria bid farewell to 15 years of leadership through decrees and embraced a life of legislation and rule of law. A transition symbolically captured in a colorful ceremony witnessed by leaders from more than 40 countries. It was a new vista of a future with hope as the new leader, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, promised prosperity. 21 years of democracy and 4 presidents. Where is the prosperity?
The economy is doing the best that it can. In fact, you will say the economy has done better, punching above its weight, so to speak, in terms of the capacity of the economy. It is not the response of the economy to the situation that is important, but to develop a greater capacity for the economy to withstand shocks. And that basically, like I said, has to do with diversification of the economy.
In the last 21 years, the wheel of democracy has been rolling through a trajectory that has seen innovation come to stay through economic reforms that vary from the 15 years of military rule which preceded it. Before the Fourth Republic, Nigeria's GDP growth had been painfully slow since 1987 and only managed 3% between 1999 and 2000. However, the growth rate doubled to 6% until 2007, helped in part by higher oil prices. Nigeria's foreign reserves rose from $2 billion in 1999 to $43 billion in 2007.
Nigeria secured debt pardons from the Paris and London clubs amounting to some $18 billion and paid another $18 billion to be debt-free. President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua came on board with the 7-point agenda and also granted amnesty to the Niger Delta militants. What that amnesty did was to pave the way for better revenue generation through improved oil production in the region.
In completing the Yar'Adua tenure and subsequently his, President Goodluck Jonathan's administration carried out a rebasing exercise which brought to the fore contributions of the creative industry and ICT to the GDP and grew the economy to become Africa's largest. Just when the current administration came in to consolidate on these gains, the country was hit by recession. But like never relenting, more reforms were deployed to salvage the economy. A visible agri-revolution and a resilient financial sector providing less hit in the recession.
Deployment of IT infrastructure, has helped to facilitate trade.
And the concept of the free market is a direct product of democracy. It's not from any other. So the idea that you can own your business and you can determine your destiny by virtue of what you do with your business is a brainchild of democracy.
With COVID-19 and the all-time global crash in prices of oil disrupting the consolidation process of the economic growth, experts say diversification of revenue sources is needed to engender inclusive growth. In all, most people are of the view that the journey has been fair and is getting better with microeconomic stability, stable exchange and inflation rates, and creation of more jobs through agriculture all in sight. Amid COVID-19 challenge, the current helmsmen have also risen up creatively.
Joining us to speak more on governance, economic development and sustainable growth in Nigeria as Nigeria celebrates Democracy Day is an investment analyst, Niyi Akinsiju. You're welcome to Business Express.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Good to have you here again.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, President Muhammadu Buhari, in his Democracy Day message, reiterated the fact that agriculture remains key in the diversification strategy of Nigeria's economy. How true is this statement? And with what has been done, what is that missing piece that we actually need to get there?
Well, I will not be looking at missing piece. I will be looking at the trend, in terms of where we are coming from, where we are, and where we are going. At a point in time, at least I know before 2015, Nigeria was more or less food deficient, to the extent that we had to depend on food exports, even for our basic needs. So much that by 2016, 2017, food inflation went to as high as 23%, and impacted so much, of course, on the inflation figures. But now, food inflation had fallen. It has not declined to the figures we want, but compared to where we are coming from, we have experienced food inflation rate as low as 13.6 before December 2019. But for the COVID inconvenience, perhaps it would have gone down. But we excuse the fact of the COVID challenge. Now it's hovering around 14%, 15%. But the essential thing is that if we look at those figures, the figures are telling us that there had been a lot of efforts, to attend issues of food security. And I think responsible for this had been the Anchor Boras program, which the president specifically talked about in his presentation. The Anchor Boras program, to my mind, why I always commend that program is that it puts the lie even to the basic economic text that we read when we were in O-level accounts.
Back in the days.
Back in the days. The principal direction of that text has to do with subsistence farming, otherwise known as smallholders farmers. These are seen to be non-economic agents in that field. And governments after governments, especially in Africa, not even in Nigeria, don't relate with smallholders farmers as a group or even as an economic agent until we have this Anchor Boras program that specifically targeted them and has shown the fact that if they are properly targeted and employed, the way the Anchor Boras program had employed them, they can actually turn into effective economic agents. So now you have more yield per hectare, and you have more people going back onto the farm. So much that this year we are talking of 1.6 million. The CBN is talking about 1.6 million activation. That is 1.6 million farmers that will be engaged in that alone.
This new farming season too.
It's telling you that more people are going in, and of course, if you look at the yield now, it's higher, though for the same land space, and then to a large extent, we can start talking of domestic food security in Nigeria now.
Before we begin to think of exports.
But we are going exports. Now, I've also heard and seen that we are talking of mechanization, in about 650 local governments. Mechanization through the provision of tractors and all that, that will be leased to agents who will also now lease them in turn to farmers and all that.
Where is the place of technology in improving the desired real yield that we need?
Well, even in the increased yield you are talking about, in terms of seedling, and I understand that new research seedling were distributed some 2-3 weeks ago. So that talks principally to increased yield, because if you are going to be sure or you have a guarantee of increased yield, it starts from the seedling you are using, in your input in the first instance.
Okay, so let's talk about the figures economically. We had witnessed 11 quarters of progressive growth consecutively on the GDP, with agriculture, like the first quarter of 2020, we have 1.8 as against 2.27% in 2019. No thanks to COVID-19. Looking beyond COVID-19, what should we do to ensure that the GDP grows beyond what we have at 1.87?
Well, we expect the figures to still retain a decline in second quarter 2020. Don't forget that it was during second quarter 2020 that we actually experienced a shutdown, a lockdown of the economy, especially the April figures are likely to be very low. But on the aggregates, I expect that there will be pent-up demands, and that these pent-up demands, once we get into the mainstream of the economy, when the economy starts picking, starting June, as it were. Now we are seeing increase in price of crude oil. We are seeing pickup in transactions. Like I always tell people, the basic of any economy is the value and the quantity of transactions. So there is increase in the quantity of transactions across segments, and of course what I am seeing the government doing, it's also important because the government is committed to expansionary spending. And to that extent, it means that more money will be provided. Already we are in deficit, given the NBS figures of first quarter in terms of employment. Don't forget that a huge number of people had been affected in different segments of the economy, especially aviation, hospitality, and tourism and all that. These are them. Yeah. And the NBS figure is talking to about 39 million people out of job already. You know, that's a huge number. And it's also talking about 79 million Nigerians experiencing fall in income. You know, when you put this all together, it would affect aggregate demand, and to that extent, it will have a snowball effect on production. You know, and since there's no effective demand, inventory will keep piling up. So what government need to do is what they are doing now: provide for spending, you know, provide for stimulus, you know, stimulus package. We have a 500 billion naira federal government package. We have up to 3 trillion naira put together by the CBN, you know, as CBN and in collaboration with the money deposit banks and all that. So there's a need to push a lot of money into the system so as not to make those 39 million jobs lost permanent.
Agriculture seems to be the key employer of labor, and the diversification move is tilting heavily towards agriculture. Agriculture is another driver in the non-oil sector. While we wait for the oil prices to stabilize for an increase, cocoa and sesame, through exports of these commodities, recently we recorded about $79.4 million to $153 million respectively. How can we tap into commodities like this to churn in much more money into the system?
It's ongoing, but don't forget that cocoa and sesame seeds are indigenous and of course the cornerstone of our exports even before now. The only difference is that they are not being concerted effort to boost demand, to boost production and supply. So in the last 1 year, there have been cocoa and sesame seed have been part of the 10 focal products that the CBN is driving. I also see cotton joining that. CBN is also driving production in cotton. And once we are able to get that right, we are creating a strong threshold, for our export capacity. Cocoa had always been traditional. In the whole Western region, cocoa was actually the basic source of earnings that drove development, and
the cocoa, the groundnut pyramids,
and of course the palm oil in the southeast. Yes. So there's that. Again, I also know that the CBN is also cashing on that. In fact, I advise somebody to buy into a palm oil producing company, which is listed. There are 3 of them listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and in the last 12 months, we know the kind of returns that even in terms of capital appreciation, So palm oil, groundnut, sesame seed. These are, we already have traditional cash crops that we can properly tap for export.
Let's look at progress in the ease of doing business, which has risen by 25 places on the World Bank ease of doing business ranking. From 146 we got to 131, and now the rating, one of the top reforming countries. How do we build on that?
It's a conscious act. Don't forget that a PBEC, Presidential Enabling Business Economic Council, business council, was set up principally to target this ranking, as it were, and because it shows that the government had political will, to realize this objective. That is why we are recording these feats as they were. And they are feats because it is not easy for a sovereign to move by those points, onto that kind of ranking. One, we are talking of use and deployment of technology. We are talking of we are talking of streamlined tax administration. We are talking of the cost. Rather than when government is in need of money, there is a tendency to increase cost, fee you know, either for licensing, for registration and all that. But what the Buhari administration has done is to actively reduce cost and provide rebates, you know, for all these processes. So by implementing these ideas, it has made access to licensing, for instance, easier. It has made access to registering businesses easier. You can on your own, you can start the process of business registration from beginning to the end in the confines of your office.
Documentation is concise, it's the timing for processing, the cost, electronic-wise, and all of that.
I had tried registering a company, I think about 20 years ago or something. It took me close to 2 years to register with my money ready, but now I can do that in 2 months. That's part of what we are saying. I mean, the basic template talks to 1 week now.
Okay, another sector that is receiving attention is the mining sector, which is receiving attention, is expanding. And what we are looking out for now is the Ajaokuta Steel company. If it comes on board, what would that mean for our economy?
Well, I am not even doubting it. I am just waiting for when it will come on board. It's no longer about if. And without pouring so much encomium on this president, because when you look at this thing holistically, you feel that this administration knows where it is going. You know, one, the government to government relationship, you know, it brokered with Russia is commendable. What had been the major drawback for Ajaokuta is that individuals, entity had always found a way of creating middleman distractions, you know, in the whole thing over the last so many years. But for the first time, we needed to have just a mere $1.5 billion to conclude.
Talking about the time and the money, time is running out.
Yeah.
Oh no, so we need to do this some other time. There needs to be continuity. Thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And from what you've said, the government, the people of Nigeria are on the right path to economic recovery and sustaining the tempo. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, moving on, shares in Europe slumped on Monday on concern over rising coronavirus infections, just as many countries begin opening up after lockdowns. Over to Bosede Ebo.
The daily rise in coronavirus pandemic cases have been reported in some areas in the United States and Asia as businesses continue to reopen. Stock futures fell in early trading of Monday 15th June, pointing to more losses as investors struggle with signs of a second wave of coronavirus cases. Futures on the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 174 points. The move implied a loss of about 580 points at the open. S&P 500 futures fell 1.31%. Nasdaq futures dropped 1.01%. Stocks in Asia dropped as investors weigh the potential impact of recent spikes in coronavirus cases. Nikkei dropped 3.47% to close at 21,530.95. Shanghai Composite down 1.02% to 2,890.03, while Hang Seng Index declined 2.16% to close at 23,776.95. European stocks were lower amid concerns over a resurgence of the coronavirus pandemic in Asia and the United States as lockdowns are eased. DAX dropped 1.46%, FTSE 1.37%, and CAC 40 1.46%. Africa's stocks were also affected as most stocks were in red. Tunisia's Tunidex, South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40, Ghana's GSA Composite, and Namibia's overall index depreciated, while Nairobi's all-share topped 0.07%.
Trading on the Nigerian Stock Exchange began the week on a negative note. The NSE All-Share Index depreciated by 0.91% to close at 24,954.25 basis points. Market capitalization dropped to 13.017 trillion naira. Investors exchanged 237.6 million shares in 4,808 deals valued at 1.6. Transaction in the shares of FBNH, Zenith Bank and FCMB led activity chart for the day. Red Star Tex, Fitson and UBN were the top price gainers, while MTN, Nigeria, Boa Cement and Zenith Bank led price gain from the rear. A sense of deja vu emerged across markets this past week, with some behaving like they did in the first quarter when the COVID-19 pandemic sent stocks and bond yields sharply lower. For details, let's see graphic summary. This is where we end this episode of the program. Don't forget you can access all previous episodes on YouTube, and you can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is @NTA News Now. The hashtag is BizX. We value your feedback. Do join us again on Wednesday for another package as we continue the fight against COVID-19. Remember to keep social distance while the lockdown is still in force. Also wash your hands with soap under running water frequently. I am Benny Adams. Do have a fulfilling week ahead.